Good morning, everyone. Welcome. It's FPC Radio Live. It's Friday. We're closing out another week. The last Friday. Hold on. 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, yes, the last Friday in May. It's almost summer, John. It's almost summer. And, things are looking up just a little bit more than they were about a couple days ago. Certainly for the Celtics, who, you know what, John? They listened. They listened to me. And it convinces me more now than ever that they listened to the show, because what did I say yesterday? I said they needed to come out and, absolutely dominate at home, play to the crowd, and really take advantage of that situation. So, and they did. And right now, I'm kind of feeling like, John, if you go back to that clip from Seinfeld, and we do this often on the show, we go back and we watch that clip of Kramer when he's at the horse track race. All right. And he's over there, he's leaning over the counter, he's pulling his hair out, he's in agony, defeat. All of a sudden, a little lift of the head and a glance at the television. And all of a sudden, hope starts to fill Kramer. And that's kind of where I'm at right now, specifically. So just about ready to make that turn and get ready to really get amped up if they can win down in Miami. All of a sudden, you're feeling pretty good about the Celtics team. I mean, you should be feeling pretty good about them right now because, again, as I said yesterday, they go out and do what they did last night. That pressure all of a sudden is on Miami.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the Celtics, the last two games, they've actually played defense, contesting the threes of the Miami Heat, which they didn't do in the first three games. So you went from giving up 120 points per game in the first three games to 98 the last two games, and that's the recipe for winning. It only took Joe Mazzulla 98 games to realize that you can transfer offense to defense and defense to offense. He always talked about if we're making our threes, everything falls into place. Well, sometimes we got to have the discussion of which comes first, the chicken or the egg. The last two games, they played outstanding defense, right? Contesting those threes, doing a good job on the defensive glass, then getting out into their offense quickly. And that sets up some open threes, which they are able to make 40% in both games 4 and 5. And that's why now we have a series. They have a chance without question. And look, they're going down to Miami for game 6. The Celtics are 13-6 on the road the last two postseasons, and they're 4-2 in Miami the last two postseasons. So they're very comfortable there. And the pressure is on Miami now because no NBA team has ever blown a 3-0 lead. Three of them have blown a 3-0 lead that got to game 7 and then were able to hold off that catastrophe. But this seems a little bit different because we all are in agreement the Celtics are the better team.
Yeah, and look, and I brought it up earlier in the week. It's like, how often has a situation like this occurred where the 8th seed is the team up 3-0? So it does create a fairly unique situation within this situation that's only happened 150 times in the history of the NBA. So and look, defense is really the key to all this, because we saw, and first of all, I don't know what happened to Al Horford, but where was this the first 3 games of the series? I mean, he was phenomenal yesterday, especially early on. I mean, he was getting boards, he was going to the hoop. I mean, he was hitting shots. He was great. He was awesome. And again, you add that, you start playing together comfortably, playing great defense. And I think, especially in this series, John, I think you're going to create more opportunities through your defense than through your offense, if that makes sense. I think that might be kind of what you're saying right now, is that the defense, how they play defense is just as good at creating offensive opportunities as it is, hitting all your threes, because, well, even if you miss a shot here and there, you're still keeping Miami off the board.
Yeah, without question. And obviously, that's the constant defense, right? You can bring that for 48 minutes. Look, there's going to be stretches where Miami's going to go on a streak like they did last night. They actually shot over 50% from the floor. But again, the Celtics did a great job on the defensive boards. And the key was Miami was not hitting their threes. They hit a lot of their twos, obviously. And you'll trade 2 for 3 every day of the week. When you look at what they do defensively, they're contesting shots. So now you control the board. Now you can get out into your offense quickly. So Miami can't necessarily set up that zone defense. You can get it to your playmakers quickly. And even if they're not going to the basket, you can start moving the ball and get the defense totally confused. And you end up with some open threes, which they did last night, whether it was Horford or Smart or White or Tatum or whoever was able to make those important threes. This game was over after the first quarter. It was 35-20, and they did exactly what they had to do. They, I believe, had 13 second chance points in the first quarter alone, and a lot of those came on threes. Get the offensive rebound, kick it out, hit that back-breaking three. So, it starts on the defensive end because you just carry that on to offense. Yes, when you're making your threes, it can also help your defense because the other team has to take the ball out of the basket, and you can go back and set up your own defense. So it's a fluid situation, basketball. It's got that type of game. It's not football where okay, now you get a punt and the defense comes out. It's a little bit differently. It's a very fluid game. But if they play like this, they're going to be tough to beat when they're hitting 40% of their threes, taking care of the basketball and contesting threes. Good luck to anybody beating them. This is how good they are.
And not turning the ball over.
Exactly. And that's the key thing as well.
That's been a huge thing the last two games. I think in game 4, they turned it over 10 times. I don't know what the final number was here, but I can't imagine it was, anything much higher than that. And the reality of it is, you talk about the points that Miami scored. A lot of it came in those final 2 minutes where they kind of closed the gap where it was closer than what the game was, because look, this team went up 20-5 in the first quarter and really just kind of played, pretty much didn't let up the entire time. They pretty much consistently kept that double-digit lead. There was a couple times it got down to 11 or whatever, but just like they did in game 4, they generally came back and answered just about any sort of Heat drive. And look, the reality of it was, I mean, the Heat's best player is Jimmy Butler, and he was okay. I mean, what else do you want to say? I mean, he's a really good player, but what impact did he have last night? Noticeable.
Yeah, no, I mean, he didn't have a really good game. Seems a little bit flat on his shot.
That's 2 in a row, by the way.
Offensively. Right. Yeah, I mean, he had 29 in game 4, but he missed a lot of bunnies. And no, he's not playing at the same level he was earlier in the series, or certainly the way he played against the Knicks, and certainly not the way he played against Milwaukee, where he had back-to-back games where he totaled 98 points, which is insane. So maybe he's gassed a little bit. He's 33, or maybe he's just an excellent player, not an all-time great player. And this is what happens to excellent players. They have some good games. They have some bad games. There's very few guys, whether it was Jordan or LeBron, those are the first two that come to mind, that brought it every single night in the postseason. Even if they weren't scoring, they were doing other things. I mean, heck, Larry Bird, as great as Larry Bird was, he had back-to-back 6-point games in the 1981 NBA Finals. Thus, you have Cedric Maxwell winning the MVP. But again, that Celtics team was outstanding, and they were playing a 40-win Houston Rockets team.
Yeah.
So, it was just a matter of how quickly they could get rid of them, and it took 6 games. But yeah, Butler's an outstanding player, but to expect him to go out every night and put up 30 with 8 rebounds, 8 assists, I mean, he's quite capable of doing it a couple of times in a series, but he's not going to do it every game. He's not that level of player.
Yeah, and I think part of it is just this weird obsession with Jimmy Butler from the media. It's strange. I'm not like I said, I think he's a really good player. I'm not trying to say that he's not. It's just they cover him like he's LeBron, but even a more successful version of LeBron, which doesn't even make any sense. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. It's just at this point though, you're looking at this series, and there's no doubt in my mind that the momentum has swung, because it's not just how they've won, but how they've kind of just taken that. You hear it after game 3. Oh, there's tension in the locker room. It's like, oh, how convenient. Here's more stories about how they hate each other. But the reality of it is, they're going out there, and the last 2 games they've had a focus about them that makes you think, yeah, they're determined to finish this off. This isn't just them having a couple really good games, because we talked about that, John. As much as the Heat were playing well, those first 3 games, a lot of it was about the Celtics and how they were playing, and how poorly they were playing, and the turnovers and the sloppy play. And then all of a sudden their defense went from being excellent to mediocre, and you can't win like that consistently in the playoffs, in the NBA or any league for that matter. So all of a sudden I think they just realized, oh yeah, wait a minute, we play really good defense. And just like last night, they're very capable of creating great ball movement. And I mean, some of the passes and everything, that the movement around, it was great. And you're like, oh, right, this is that Celtics team we saw for much of the regular season. And I think you simply do that, nothing more. You're going to win this series because, well, you're just a better team than Miami, especially if you're getting to a stretch, if you're Miami, where Jimmy Butler's not on a hot streak. And that's going to be a problem because they have no one else to pick up the slack. I mean, Bam Adebayo, I mean, he was bad yesterday. I mean, he was sloppy. He couldn't, you know what I mean? Like, he wasn't that good. And is he their second best player?
Yeah, he's their second best player. He's good on the defensive end as well. But yeah, he's up and down as well. Again, he's one of those players in the NBA that can go get you 20-10 one night, and then the next night get you 10 and 5, which is, half the production. So yeah, he's one of those guys. And then Caleb Martin's been probably the second best player in this series. Then you get Gabe Vincent. We'll see if he's back for Game 6. Kyle Lowry is aging right before our eyes. So Max Strus is a guy who can go hot and cold. Yeah, no, I mean, the Celtics have a better roster than the Miami Heat without question. And, I think the Celtics determine who wins these games. Like you said, in the first 3 games, they just weren't there. And Miami did what Miami can do, which is take advantage of your mistakes. But now that the Celtics are playing the way they're supposed to, you look at 2 comfortable wins.
Yeah, and that's the encouraging thing. So obviously Game 6 tomorrow, you win Game 6, and I think all of a sudden I don't. You're like I said, it's one game at a time, but I think they've gotten over the biggest hurdle because like you go down 3-0, and after that initial disappointment, you're like, all right, there's no pressure. Okay, we're just playing, and generally it's like, okay, you get all these hopes and dreams of coming back 3-0, and then generally you lose in game 4 or 5, and it's like, okay, whatever. But they kind of got those first 2 games out of the way. Now, like I said, when you look at it as just a 2-game series, you have to win 2 in a row. It's like, okay, the Celtics can do that against the Miami team. Sure, absolutely. So a lot of good things if you're a Celtics fan or the Celtics in general, because I think they did exactly what to do to really move this comeback forward, and we'll see what happens tomorrow night. So like the Celtics in Game 4 over in the NHL, the Dallas Stars staved off from elimination last night in overtime. Another quick overtime. After that 4 overtime period, I think all these teams got together and was like, all right, guys, let's go to overtime. Let's try and end it pretty quickly. And that's what happened last night when Joe Pavelski buried the puck in the first overtime to get past Vegas. We've seen more, obviously, 3-0 comebacks, as you so appropriately brought up yesterday. In the NHL than any other sport, and it's certainly more possible. I don't think it's going to happen. I think Dallas is a nice story. They might win another one, but I think Vegas is ultimately going to close this out. We're looking at a Vegas-Florida Stanley Cup final. But yeah, it's good to get a little bit more hockey, a little bit more out of this series today, or with the overtime win.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you would have had 2 sweeps in the conference final, and instead now you've got Vegas still in command of this series, going home to try to wrap it up in 5 games. And you go from there. And again, I think really to sustain this comeback, Dallas is going to have to play nearly perfect hockey. Your goaltender is going to have to step up, because that's one way you can do it. Although I remember in 2010, I hate to bring this up, but I don't think Philadelphia's goaltending was all that great in that 3-0 comeback, right? I mean, the Bruins still scored some goals there, but they gave up more, obviously. But, I go all the way back. I remember, look, I'm the old person here. In 1975, the Islanders almost did this in back-to-back series.
Yeah.
They were down 3-0 against, I believe it was Pittsburgh, came back and won 4-3. Then they were down 3-0 against the defending Stanley Cup champion Flyers and came back and forced Game 7 and lost Game 7. It's like, talk about a team that, like to live on the edge. But, yeah, I would expect Vegas to try to wrap this thing up as soon as possible and get rested up and ready for the Stanley Cup final, because sometimes when you look at these teams that are playing on such a roll, you don't want to have this long layoff. Like the Denver Nuggets now are going to have like a 10-day layoff between the end of the Western Conference Finals and the start of the NBA Finals, whereas these other teams, the Celtics or the Heat, are going to kind of roll into the finals with some sort of momentum.
And look, I think 2 very, different outlooks when it comes to who they would possibly face. The longer this goes, the worse it is for Denver, because, well, the longer it goes, the more likely it is that they end up facing the Celtics, a team that, it's not going to be a sure thing for them, but certainly Denver it's they're they're going to see far more resistance from assuming again the Celtics are playing their game. They're going to see far more resistance from the Celtics than they did the Lakers or any other team, and certainly more than they would get from the Heat. And again, I understand this sounds strange given that the Heat are up 3-2 and have been up 3-0, but it's the unique situation that we're in that we don't necessarily get, where the Celtics team is just better than, unfortunately, what they were the first 3 games. And in the playoffs, all it takes is 4 games to kind of lose your way. And, that's what we're seeing. But it's going to be interesting. And again, if you're the Panthers and the NHL, I don't know, do you want a longer break? Do you want to keep things going? I think a little bit of rest is nice, but not too much. So they're probably hoping Vegas gets this finished, because that would start, I believe, on, I don't know, actually. I don't know when it would start, John.
I think it would start on Wednesday, because I'm assuming the NHL's
if it ended, I think if it ended yesterday.
Right, yeah, so either Monday or Wednesday. So let's say, the Dallas-Vegas series goes Saturday, so it's wrapped up then. I doubt you start it Monday, maybe Wednesday, but you don't want to go head-to-head with the NBA Finals.
No.
You want to have that on a different night. I mean, I do remember, again, call me old, the Bruins were playing the Flyers in 74 in the Stanley Cup Final, and the Celtics were playing the Bucks in the NBA Finals, and there were multiple times in those final series that they were playing against each other.
Yeah.
On the same night, I'm like, can't these two leagues get together and figure this out? Why am I? Back then, we didn't have the technology we have now, so you're running into different rooms to watch parts of each game.
Right.
But man, I sound like I'm Daniel Boone or someone that grew up in the 1860s. I mean, we did have.
You did it?
We used to call them clickers. Yeah, we had clickers, not remotes. There were clickers at that point. Although I think, to be honest with you, we had those old cable boxes that you had to walk up to and bash the little knob in.
Yeah.
So I'm only 60. I mean, I'm not that old, I guess, but yeah. We've come a long way.
Yeah, they made you work for changing your channel. Let's just put it that way.
That's why we stayed in shape. Get up and go change the channel,
Yeah, exactly.
But, and now, if this goes to Game 7 at TD Garden, right? Do you want to tempt fate? Do you invite Alex Rodriguez and Derek Jeter to come in and give them courtside seats at TD Garden? And do you bring in David Ortiz?
I think you tap into.
Else,
I think you tap into 04 as much as possible, because we talked about it already. There's so many striking similarities, not only in just this series, but even last year, where it's obviously the Red Sox didn't get to the World Series in 2003, but they had a devastating loss that felt like they kind of blew an opportunity, which is kind of what we saw in 2003 with that Red Sox team. And now you come back the next year, you're against impossible odds in the semifinals. And so I like it. Let's invite him.
The only thing is, I remember, again, this is my third old story, I'm sorry, but I'm going to bring us back to the early 80s instead of the 70s. The Celtics beat the 76ers in the 81 Eastern Conference Finals after trailing 3-1. And those 3 games were all 1 or 2 point games. It was just an incredible comeback to win Game 5 and then Game 7 at the old Boston Garden, Game 6 in Philadelphia. That's the game Cedric Maxwell went into the stands and fought a fan and didn't get thrown out of the game or suspended, because that's the way the league was, 40 years ago. The next year, the 76ers got up 3-1 again.
Yeah.
And then the Celtics won Game 5 at Boston Garden, Game 6 at the Old Spectrum. So Game 7 was on a Sunday afternoon, and all I remember is there were people actually dressed up as ghosts, right? Fans were dressed up as ghosts. And all I remember is Dr. J after the game, because Philadelphia won that Game 7 and kind of blow up fashion, Dr. J saying, "I thought the Klan was here." Because they were all in a white sheet. It was I don't even know if you could say that anymore, but this was 40 years ago. But the point is, if you're a Boston sports fan, you've seen on both ends the comebacks or blown leads. I mean, whether it's the Red Sox in 04, obviously the Patriots had a slew of them, maybe the biggest of all, 28-3 against Atlanta.
Look, you can
see a lot of these.
You can, if the Celtics do complete this, you can make an argument that Boston has 3 of the 3 greatest comebacks out of those individual sports. I mean, out of the 4 major sports, they would hold 3 of the greatest, and I think very inarguably too. Not just like, oh, one of the
Yep.
greatest. No, like 28-3. I mean, that's going to be a hard thing to top in the Super Bowl. You can argue that the Cavs comeback in the NBA Finals would arguably be better, but then it's the only team to come back down 3-0. And then obviously the Red Sox Yankees come back. So yeah, and it's all happened in the last 20 years, or would have happened in the last, well, technically 19 years because of 2004.
Right.
So yeah, it's pretty.
The
It's
key
pretty.
to that is
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. The key to that would be then the Celtics would have to win the championship, because if you don't win the championship,
Yeah.
the comebacks are amazing. Whereas, of course, the Red Sox won the World Series, and of course, the Patriots, that was the Super Bowl.
Yeah. So and look, but in terms of like individual, um, obviously in football, it's an individual game because there's no series. But in terms of individual series or individual game, it would still be the greatest comeback in terms of, well, again, no one in the NBA or Major League Baseball would have done this in many opportunities. So it'll be interesting. Aaron Rodgers' calf is fine, according to Aaron Rodgers, Dr. Aaron Rodgers. Doctor
He
Mystical
wouldn't refute
Science.
that either. He would probably agree with that. I am a doctor.
Yeah, I am a doctor of something.
Football.
But no, you had actually texted me this yesterday, and I thought it was interesting because we've done our top 5 quarterbacks, and Patrick Mahomes, who, look, I mean, I've said it a lot. He's an easy kid to like. I think it's his fans and the coverage around him that makes it kind of just like, a sickening prospect to pay too much attention. But his top 5 quarterback list of all time: Brady, Manning, Rodgers, Montana, Elway, or Marino. And I wonder if that's going to draw the ire of some Chiefs fans, because there's no greater, I guess, opponent of John Elway than Chiefs fans. And surprise, surprise, I wonder why. Probably not because they've been in the same division and probably saw him win a lot of games against the Chiefs. But it's funny because, like, I feel like Elway is the most like misunderstood quarterback, great quarterback, because like some people think he sucks. And other people,
I'd like
right?
to talk to them.
Well, I know. I usually give them your number, so
please do.
I do. But it's a weird thing because, like, people swear that he's just a bad quarterback, and it's like, look, I just don't understand. Some people have him a little bit higher than I would, but that I don't think is a big issue. It's the people that think he's just outright bad that baffle me. But Patrick Mahomes seems to, I think he's right. I mean, it's not. I mean, I wouldn't put Aaron Rodgers this high. I don't agree with that. But yeah, I think he's got the right idea. Yeah, and hey, anytime you put Brady at the top of the list, that's a good start. But I've seen a lot of lists fall apart past that before. So
yeah.
Like, I mean, terribly. I mean, awful. Just, I mean, I can't even explain some of the things I've seen on lists, because putting Brady number 1 is fairly simple. I mean, there's a few guys that you could put up that obviously are going to get people to come back at him. But I think that's mostly like the old generation guys, like the Otto Grahams of the world. I think, okay, you want to put him out there, you agree, but you know what I mean? It's at least a conversation. In this situation, Brady's a pretty easy number 1. It's like, okay, well, how does it follow through after that? And yeah, I mean, look, I don't agree with the Rodgers one, but it's not a terrible list at all.
No,
actually.
I think it's a great list, to be honest with you, because it's the same 6 I have, slightly different order. And I think that Unitas and Otto Graham are the other 2 names. But I mean, Patrick Mahomes doesn't know anything about Unitas or Otto Graham unless he's really a football historian. And even then, he never saw them play. He probably didn't see a lot of Montana, because Montana retired nearly 20 years ago, and Mahomes is in his late 20s. So I think we're just kind of looking at the Super Bowl era. Obviously, Brady's number 1. I always put Montana number 2, Manning 3, Elway 4. Then I go Rodgers 5, Marino 6. So it's the same 6 quarterbacks, just a little bit of a different order. I have told you a million times, I think if every quarterback played at the same exact time, same sport, the way the sport was played, same situation, like the equal offensive lines, receivers, defenses, that John Elway may have been the greatest quarterback ever. He went to 3 Super Bowls with 3 pretty bad teams and had to face powerhouse teams, the 86 Giants, the 87 Redskins, and the 89 49ers. Like, he got beat up in all those games because he was just playing teams that were way better than him. When he finally got a competent defense and a running game, he won 2 Super Bowls. So, people that think he's overrated probably didn't even see him play. That is probably like a 25.
Well, they look at his
Twitter
numbers.
That looks at stats, right? And look, even Marino's stats pale compared to Patrick Mahomes or Aaron Rodgers. It's a different sport.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that's so hard to, I guess, accept or comprehend in a lot of situations. And most of the people that think John Elway sucked basically just look at his raw numbers and come to their conclusion based on that. And look, I mean, football. That's why I like, look, right now, Chiefs fans love EPA. Okay. Because it's obviously very favorable to Patrick Mahomes, but more so it's favorable to the game today and also the particular way the Chiefs play. And this isn't meant to be a shot at Patrick Mahomes. It's more or less just to point out, like, look, numbers don't tell you everything. And yes, I get it. Like, oh yes, I mean he's far right corner in all these graphs. Good, he shares a lot of the same territory with Jimmy Garoppolo, and no one's going to put Jimmy Garoppolo at the top of that list. So, I think it's just it's weird how we interpret numbers because there is no perfect number, and I think people find what they like and treat it as such. And I think that creates a lot of, very hard-nosed, stances on things where you're just going to be stubborn and you're not going to, sway either way. And I think it gives us a false interpretation of greatness, especially across eras. I mean, look at how we look at wide receivers. That might be the worst position now because the numbers are so inflated. Where I saw someone tweet the other day that Mike Evans is a surefire Hall of Famer. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, Mike Evans is a really good wide receiver. He's 6-7 straight seasons of 1,000 yards. He's not a Hall of Fame receiver. I'm sorry. Like that's not what the Hall of Fame is. It's not the Hall of Very Good. So I think the numbers, unfortunately, have muddied the waters so much that, people are arguing about greatness and posting dot graphs. And I'm like, and I kind of just, snidely will always respond like, oh, that looks like football, or, wow, that circle is far right. Like, you know what I mean? Like, to me, I just like, if you were to ask people that, let's put it this way, like EPA, like I said, we'll go back to that and how it's looked at, and it's like, oh, look at Patrick Mahomes, always over here, always like so much better than everyone else, and they're going to keep pushing it. But I guarantee you, if you ask any of those people, and those even that really feel like they understand it, if you ask them what the significance of it is, I guarantee you're not going to get much more than the textbook definition that they read off a website of what EPA is, and not be able to tell me why it's significant in this situation, or why it's significant here, or what does it really tell you. And it's like, it doesn't really tell you much.
No, I mean, I think, look, Patrick Mahomes, we can watch him play and all agree that he's a great quarterback. And you know what? In 3 or 4 years, when someone puts out their top 5 list, he may crash it because he's already got 2 Super Bowls. He's won as many Super Bowls as Manning and Elway. He's won 1 more Super Bowl than Rodgers, 2 more than Marino. You don't have to exaggerate his greatness, right? So this is what a lot of his fans do. Back to your point about wide receivers. Yeah, I mean, Mike Evans plays in a league now that is up to 17 games. So if you average 60 yards per game, you're going to crack 1,000 yards. And for probably 2/3 of his career, he's played on a team that was not very good, was constantly behind. So there were probably some garbage yards in there. And I've gone back and forth with people on Twitter. Paul Warfield, to me, is the most underrated receiver in the history of the sport. But he played in an era where it wasn't passing centric the way it is now. And he played on a Miami Dolphins team that went undefeated and ran the football from like 18 passes a game. And he still managed to get 11 touchdowns in that 72 season. And if you ask Clark Judge or Ron Borges, guys who have watched the sport for 60-plus years and have Hall of Fame votes, they'll put Paul Warfield right up there among the greatest wide receivers ever. But the person who's 26 years old that just got into football looks at his stats and go, how can you say that? Well, I saw the guy play in a completely different era, and he dominated at that level.
If I said Don Hudson is the greatest wide receiver ever,
there's a case that can be made for that.
Exactly. But the way it's viewed now, it's like, oh, well, look at his numbers. Well, look at his numbers relative to the era in which he played in. And you can see, I mean, again, like you said, there's a case to be made that he was more dominating than Jerry Rice. And look, those are interesting conversations. But the problem is, I think it's going to take a while for us to I'm meaning like the football community, the fan bases, the people that cover the game, everything's included. I think it's going to take us a while to really understand some of these numbers, because especially I feel like in the last 10 or 15 years, they've drastically changed. Like, I've said it a lot in arguments on Twitter. I pointed out that and I hate the passer rating metric, but it's a pretty cut and dry way to kind of visualize the difference in just 20 years make. In 1999, I believe the passer rating was about 78, the average. That was the year Kurt Warner, I think he had like 30 points above average passer rating. In 2018, it was 96, John. So, and it's like, I mean, again, that, if anything, that speaks to, because passer ratings are very simple catch, yards, touchdown, very simple formula, when it comes to measuring play. But I think it's the usefulness here is just showing the difference in how offenses across the board got easier. Not easier from an understanding standpoint, but easier to execute. So, like, we're talking about league average. So, yes, of course, in 1999 or 2000, you're going to have players that are going to break well above average. Well, guess what? Your average to below average quarterback is clearing 78 passer rating. I mean, easily. I think Mac Jones has had an 80 passer rate. You know what I mean? Like, and
Baker
70.
Mayfield,
yeah. So
guys that are at the bottom of the list of breaking that. Yeah, they would have. You're making great points, Ian. I think when he retired, Steve DeBerg may have had the highest passer rating at the time he retired. Like, does anybody think Steve DeBerg's an all-time great quarterback? And they would say, oh, Steve DeBerg has a higher passer rating than John Elway. I go, well, that's great. I guarantee you when they face each other head-to-head that Elway won every one of those games.
Yeah, and again, like I said, I mean, this is kind of like the none of these stats are ever going to tell you everything. Because I mean, look, this isn't fantasy football. No offense, Kyle. We're talking real football here. Kyle just joined us, so I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned fantasy football. But no, the point is, you're not going to win a Super Bowl or whatever playing off a simulation. You know what I mean? It's like there's much more to it. So we get to these conversations, and numbers today are just kind of really warping a lot of the the comparisons, obviously from past generations, but just kind of putting us in a situation where people are saying Mike Evans is a surefire Hall of Famer, and I'm just like, no, I don't believe that. I think he's a great wide receiver, but there's a lot of great players that aren't in the Hall of Fame, and someone in Tampa apparently.
Get you?
Yeah, well, they heard. I mean, I live here, so maybe I got to keep this down a little bit. I know my neighbor's a Bucs fan, so
don't disparage Mike Evans. Yeah, it might have been someone sent to get you. But look at just a week ago, the great Jim Brown passed away, right?
Yeah.
Who I think everyone agrees is the greatest running back ever, and in the conversation with Tom Brady is the greatest football player ever. And Frank Gore's third all time in rushing, and Jim Brown's like 12th in rushing.
Yeah.
In terms of rushing yardage, does anyone think Frank Gore was greater than Jim Brown? Hell no. What you have to do is look at the numbers that Jim Brown averaged 106 yards per game.
Mm-hmm.
He only played 118 games because he only played 9 years. Half of his career was spent in the league with 12-game seasons. Like, of course he's not going to accumulate the same numbers of a guy who played 17, 18 years in a 16-game schedule. And that's quite an accomplishment to be a running back that long. But we're talking about greatness here. And, yeah, people will look at it and go, well, this running back had more yards gained than Jim Brown, so he must be better. No,
and look, it's not black and white in all these conversations, because like I get into some of these sometimes, and the common thing is, especially when it comes to combating against Tom Brady, it's like, oh, so it was just the yards then, or just because he's thrown the most touchdowns, it's longevity, it's this, it's that. It's like, no, first of all, it's both with Tom Brady, the
Right.
numbers and the success. I mean, that's the reason why it's so easy to sit there and say that he's the greatest, this, that, or the other, because, well, no one has a combination of both. And certainly not, I mean, when it comes to championship success, no one's even close at this point. And when it comes to number success, I say it all the time, as great as Patrick Mahomes is, he's going to have to do exactly what he's been doing for the next 15 years just to hit Tom Brady's numbers. Now, again, that would bring him to 40, 41, which would, again, a little bit sooner than Brady, but that's the point. Like, that's not guaranteed by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, who's to say that he's going to be this effective every single season? So right now the numbers are wildly out of reach. And it's going to be interesting to see how these conversations, and I think in particular with wide receivers, because when we're talking about I don't even know how we got down this road, but when we talk about wide receivers, I think that's the most I don't know, just the conversation when it comes to Hall of Fame worthiness or not is just it's out of whack right now, because numbers have kind of completely screwed that all up. So
speaks to the greatness of Jerry Rice, because he still owns all the records by a wide margin, and he entered the league nearly 40 years ago. I'm going to send you away this weekend on something that's going to keep you smiling for the entire weekend. Okay,
good.
All right, so we all agree Larry Bird's one of the greatest players in the history of basketball, second greatest Celtic, one of the greatest athletes in the history of Boston. In his first 10 years, he went to, I believe, 8 conference finals, won 5 of them, went to 5 NBA finals, won 3 NBA championships. Okay, great career, all-time great. Tom Brady did that between 2010 and 2019 with the Patriots. The thing is, the previous 10 years before that, he won 3 Super Bowls and had gone to 4 Super Bowls. And then, oh, by the way, to just top it off, he goes to Tampa and wins the Super Bowl. So essentially, Tom Brady accomplished twice as much as Larry Bird did in his career, and again, Larry Bird's an all-time great. I was just thinking about that the other day, because I'm a big Larry Bird supporter. People kind of seem to have forgotten about him. And I'm like, damn, Tom Brady won more than 2 times as many championships as Larry Bird. And, they were both at a high level. Bird did it for 10 years. Brady did it for 20. I was just thinking of that. So I want to give you that as a gift going into Memorial Day.
Well, and going into Memorial Day, I hope that the story about Jimmy G's foot continues to grow as Tom Brady lurks in the owner's box. So just saying, there's still a chance. Just like for the Celtics, there's still a chance. There's still a chance. There's a road to an opportunity. So, all right, that's going to do it for us here today. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you for everyone for participating in our little chat room here. And we will be back on Monday to potentially talk Game 7. So we'll see what happens then. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and we'll talk to you then.